Babylon. The year is 593 before the Common Era. A river moves slowly through the flat Mesopotamian plain, a great canal the Babylonians called the Kebar, carrying the waters of the Euphrates out to the fields and the date palms. On its banks sits a community of exiles. They are Judeans, carried here from Jerusalem only 4 years before, when the armies of Nebuchadnezzar took their king and their nobles and their craftsmen away into captivity. They are far from home, far from the temple, far, they assume, from the presence of their God, whose dwelling place was Mount Zion, whose throne was the Ark in the Holy of Holies, hundreds of miles to the west. And then the sky tears open. A young priest named Ezekiel looks up, and what he sees will trouble theologians, mystics, and ordinary believers for the next 2,500 years. He sees a storm wind coming out of the north. He sees a vast cloud shot through with fire. He sees gleaming metal glowing at the heart of the brightness. And as the cloud draws near, he sees that it is filled with living things, creatures with 4 faces, wings that touch, feet that gleam like burnished bronze. Beside them, wheels rising from the earth, wheels within wheels, their rims covered all around with eyes. And above them all, a crystal dome, and above the dome, a throne the color of sapphire, and on the throne, a figure like a man, wrapped in fire, and surrounded by a radiance like the rainbow after rain. This is the Merkabah, the chariot throne of God, and it has come to Babylon. What you are about to explore is one of the strangest and most guarded passages in all of Scripture. For centuries, Jewish tradition forbade teaching this vision openly. The rabbis warned that those who gazed too deeply into it risked their sanity, their faith, even their lives. Out of it grew an entire underground river of mysticism, the tradition called Merkabah, the work of the chariot, a tradition of ascent and danger and wonder. And out of it, too, came the imagery that would shape how both Jews and Christians pictured the throne of heaven for all the ages that followed. The 4 faces, the wheels, the many eyes, the holy, holy, holy. Settle in and stay with this to the end, because the meaning of what Ezekiel saw is far stranger and far more comforting than most people have ever been told. If you find yourself moved by these ancient mysteries, take a moment to subscribe and let us know in the comments where you are listening from tonight. Now, let us return to the river and to the priest who could not look away. To understand the vision, you must first understand the man and the moment, because the two are bound together more tightly than they first appear. Ezekiel was the son of Buzi, and Scripture tells us he was a priest. That single word carries enormous weight. A priest of Israel did not simply hold a profession. A priest was a man whose entire identity, whose family line, whose daily purpose was bound to one place on earth, the temple in Jerusalem, and to the rituals performed there, the sacrifices, the incense, the service before the presence of the Most High. A priest in exile was a priest who could not be a priest. His altar was rubble in another country. His sanctuary was a memory. He was, in the truest sense, a man cut off from the one thing that gave his life its meaning. And he was not alone. The text tells us the vision came in the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiachin, the young Judean king who had surrendered to Babylon and been carried away. Ezekiel was among the first wave of deportees, the elite of Jerusalem, settled in a place the Bible calls Tel Abib, by the Kebar Canal. Around him were thousands of his people, all of them wrestling with the same agonizing questions. Had their God been defeated? Had the gods of Babylon proven stronger? Was the covenant broken? Was he still there at all? This is the soil into which the vision falls. Remember it. Because everything Ezekiel sees is an answer to a question the exiles did not even dare to ask aloud. He records the date with a priest's precision. The 30th year, the 4th month, the 5th day. As he sat among the exiles by the river, he writes, "The heavens were opened, and he saw visions of God." The Hebrew is plain and overwhelming at once. The heavens were opened, not a crack, not a glimpse, opened, as though a veil that had hung between earth and the unseen realms since the beginning was suddenly drawn back, and the priest, who had lost his sanctuary, was granted a sight that no sanctuary on earth could contain. And what came first was the storm. He saw a stormy wind sweeping in from the north, a great cloud, dense and dark, with fire flashing continually within it, lightning curling back on itself, never ceasing. And around the cloud, a brightness, a radiance, and in the very center of the fire, something the Hebrew calls chashmal, a word so mysterious that translators across the centuries have rendered it amber, or glowing metal, or electrum, or the gleam of polished bronze pulled white-hot from the furnace. The ancient Greek translators, working centuries before Christ, called it electron, the shining alloy of gold and silver. It is a word that means brightness with a metallic edge, light that seems almost solid, fire that has taken on substance. Hold on to that word, chashmal, because it will return in this story in a way you will not expect. In later centuries, the rabbis would treat it as one of the most dangerous words in the entire vision. There was a story, preserved in the Talmud, of a child who was reading the book of Ezekiel and came to understand the meaning of chashmal, and fire came forth and consumed him. Whether the story is meant as history or as warning, its message is unmistakable. Some words are not safe to understand too well, some brightness burns, but that is the future of the tradition. For now, in the present of the vision, the storm wind rolls in from the north, and at its heart the four living creatures appear. The direction matters. North, in the ancient Near Eastern imagination, was the direction of the divine mountain, the seat of the gods, the place from which both blessing and judgment descended. For a Judean exile, north was also the direction from which Babylon itself had come, the armies that had shattered Jerusalem sweeping down from the north. And now, from that same direction, from the heart of the storm, comes not another conqueror, but the throne of the living God, riding the tempest as a king rides into his city. Out of the fire came forms. The text calls them Chariot, living creatures, living ones. And the priest, trained to observe and to describe with exactness, gives us their shape detail by detail, as though he is trying to write down something his mind can barely hold. They had, he says, the likeness of a man. Their general form was upright, manlike, recognizable. But there the resemblance ended, because each of these living ones had 4 faces and 4 wings. Their legs were straight, and the soles of their feet were like the sole of a calf's foot, round and gleaming, sparkling like burnished bronze polished to a mirror shine. Under their wings, on each of their 4 sides, were the hands of a man. 2 of their wings stretched upward, touching the wings of the creature beside them, so that the 4 together formed a kind of unity, a single structure of joined wings. The other 2 wings covered their bodies, and when they moved, they did not turn. They went straight forward, each in the direction one of its faces was looking, gliding wherever the spirit would go, never pivoting, never doubling back. Picture it for a moment. 4 beings, joined at the wingtips, facing outward in all 4 directions at once, so that whichever way the whole formation needed to travel, a face was already looking that way. There was no front and no back. No need to turn. The structure could move north, south, east, or west with the same immediate readiness, because it was already complete in every direction. Nothing took it by surprise. Nothing approached from behind. And then the faces. Each living creature, Ezekiel tells us, had 4. The face of a man, looking forward, the face of a lion on the right side, the face of an ox on the left, and the face of an eagle behind. A human, a lion, an ox, an eagle. These 4 faces, more than any other element of the vision, would echo down through the centuries, carved into cathedral stone, painted into illuminated manuscripts, woven into the very structure of how the church would come to read its own gospels. But before any of that, the rabbis of Israel asked a simpler and more profound question. Why these 4? Out of all the creatures of the earth, Why a man, a lion, an ox, and an eagle? The answer that emerged from rabbinic tradition is elegant, and once you hear it, you cannot unhear it. These four, the sages taught, are the kings of creation. The lion is the king of the wild beasts, the mightiest of those that hunt and roam. The ox is the chief of the domestic animals, the strongest of those that serve and labor alongside humanity. The eagle is the king of the birds, sovereign of everything that flies. And the man is the crown of all created life, the ruler given dominion over every other living thing. Four faces, four kingdoms of the living world. Wild and tame, soaring and earthbound, beast and human, all of them gathered up and bound together beneath the throne. Do you see what this means? The creatures that carry the throne of God are not merely angels in the abstract. They are creation itself, summed up, lifted up, brought into the presence of its maker. All that lives is represented there, at the foundation of the chariot. The lion's strength, the ox's patient power, the eagle's far sight and swiftness, the human face that can know its creator and speak his name. Every order of life has its representative beneath the sapphire throne, and every order of life is, in that vision, doing one thing: carrying the glory, bearing up the presence, moving wherever the Spirit directs. Some among the later commentators went further still and read the four faces as a map of the human person or of the cosmos itself, the four directions, the four winds, the four corners of the earth, the fourfold fullness of everything that is. Four is the number of the created world in the symbolic language of Scripture, the four rivers of Eden, the four corners, the four winds. And so to give the living creatures four faces was to say, in the silent grammar of vision, that the whole world stands beneath this throne, that nothing in all creation falls outside the reach of the one who sits above the dome. But we are getting ahead of the vision. Ezekiel's eyes have not yet risen to the throne. They are still fixed on the creatures and the fire that moves among them, for there was fire, burning coals, the text says, like torches, moving back and forth between the living creatures. The fire was bright, and out of the fire went lightning, and the living creatures themselves darted to and fro. The Hebrew suggests, like the appearance of a flash of lightning, here and gone, gone and here, faster than the eye could follow. The whole vision crackled with motion and light, fire among the creatures, lightning leaping out, the radiance of the chashmal at the center, the gleam of bronze on every gliding foot. This was not a still and silent tableau. It was alive with energy, ceaseless, restless, blazing, and yet, as we will see, governed perfectly by a single hidden will. And then Ezekiel looked down to the ground beside the living creatures, and saw the thing that would give the whole vision its most famous and most haunting image. He saw the wheels. There was a wheel upon the earth beside the living creatures, he writes, one wheel for each of the four faces. The wheels and their craftsmanship gleamed like beryl, like the precious stone the Hebrew calls Tarshish, a gem of pale gold and sea green, the color of chrysolite, the color of still water catching the light. All four were alike, and their construction was unlike anything in the made world, for each wheel, he says, was as it were a wheel in the middle of a wheel within a wheel. For thousands of years, readers have tried to picture exactly what this means. Some imagine two wheels set at right angles to each other, one inside the other, like the rings of a gyroscope, so that the whole could roll in any direction without ever turning, without ever needing to pivot or steer. This would match what Ezekiel says next, that the wheels moved in any of their four directions without swerving as they went. Others pictured concentric circles, a smaller wheel nested inside a larger one, an image of depth, of mystery folded inside mystery. In the medieval centuries, when scholars pictured the cosmos as a set of nested crystalline spheres carrying the sun and moon and stars, some saw in the wheel within a wheel a vision of the very structure of the heavens, sphere within sphere, the machinery of the turning sky. Whatever its exact geometry, the meaning the text presses upon us is motion without limitation. The chariot of God is not like an earthly chariot, which must turn its wheels and steer its course and double back to change direction. This throne moves with perfect freedom, instantly, in any direction, because the wheels themselves are built for omnidirectional motion, just as the four faces of the creatures look in every direction at once. The whole vision is straining to communicate one idea through every detail. This presence is not bound. This throne is not stuck. It goes wherever it wills, the moment it wills, with nothing to slow it and nothing to turn it aside. And then comes the detail that makes the skin prickle. Their rims, Ezekiel says, were tall and awesome, and the rims of all four were full of eyes round about. Eyes, set into the wheels, covering them, ringing them all the way around. The wheels of the chariot were watching. What are the eyes? The tradition has never agreed, and perhaps that is fitting. Some read them as a sign of omniscience, the all-seeing knowledge of God carried even in the very wheels of his throne, so that nothing in any direction the chariot might travel could be hidden from it. Wherever it goes, it sees. Others heard in the many-eyed wheels an echo of the watchers, the wakeful ones, the sleepless guardians of the divine presence who never close their eyes, who keep eternal vigil around the throne. Still others, gazing up at the night sky, wondered whether the eyes were the stars themselves, the countless lights of heaven set into the turning wheels of the cosmos. Whatever the answer, the impression is unmistakable. This is a throne that sees, a presence aware in every direction, a glory from which nothing is concealed, in Babylon or Jerusalem or anywhere beneath the dome of heaven. And the wheels and the creatures moved as one. This is the heart of it. When the living creatures went, Ezekiel says, the wheels went beside them. When the creatures rose from the earth, the wheels rose. Wherever the Spirit would go, they went, and the wheels rose alongside them, because, in the words that the priest repeats as though astonished by them, the Spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. The same Spirit animated both. There was no separate engine, no team of beasts pulling a cart behind them. The creatures and the wheels were a single living thing, a single will, moving in flawless unison, fire and bronze and beryl and the watching eyes, all of it gliding together wherever the unseen Spirit directed. The chariot was alive, and it was one. There was a sound, too. Ezekiel could not see the throne yet, but he could hear the wings. When the creatures moved, he says, he heard the sound of their wings, and it was like the sound of many waters, like the roar of a great cataract, like the voice of the Almighty, like the tumult of an army, like the noise of a vast camp of soldiers. And when they stood still and let their wings fall, there was a stillness, and a voice came from above the firmament that was over their heads. Hold that sequence in your mind, because it is the architecture of the whole vision, ascending stage by stage. First the storm and the cloud, then the four living creatures within it, then the wheels beside them on the earth. And now Ezekiel's eyes are lifted higher, above the heads of the creatures, where he sees something stretched out over them, shining. Over the heads of the living creatures, he says, there was the likeness of a firmament, the Hebrew word rakia, the same word used in the opening chapter of Genesis for the expanse of heaven that God spread out on the second day. And this firmament shone like awesome crystal, like ice, like a sheet of frozen brilliance stretched above the creatures, dazzling and terrible to look upon. It was a platform, a floor of crystal light, held up by the creatures and their wings, separating the realm of the chariot below from whatever lay above. And above the firmament, above the crystal floor, there was a throne. The throne, Ezekiel says, had the appearance of sapphire stone, of lapis lazuli, the deep heavenly blue that the ancients prized above almost every other gem, the blue of the sky brought down into solid form. Here we should pause, because this is not the first time in Scripture that the blue of sapphire marks the place beneath the feet of God. When Moses and the elders of Israel went up the mountain and saw the God of Israel, the book of Exodus tells us, there was under his feet something like a pavement of sapphire stone, clear as the very heavens. The same blue, the same stone, the same hint that where God sets his feet, the floor itself becomes the color of heaven. Ezekiel, the exiled priest, is seeing what Moses saw, the sapphire throne, but now it is not fixed upon a mountain. Now it rides upon the chariot, now it moves. And on the throne, high above, there was a likeness, as it were, of the appearance of a man. Notice how carefully the priest speaks. He does not say, "On the throne sat a man." He piles up his qualifiers, like a man trying to describe a light too bright to look at directly. A likeness, as it were, the appearance. The semblance of a human form, seated on the sapphire throne, and yet not flesh, as we know flesh. For from what seemed to be the waist upward, the figure gleamed like chashmal, like that same glowing metal at the heart of the storm, fire enclosed all around. And from the waist downward, there was the appearance of fire, and a brightness encircling the whole. And the radiance around the throne, Ezekiel says, was like the appearance of the bow that is in the cloud on a day of rain. Like a rainbow, the whole figure wreathed in the soft, full spectrum of color that arches across the sky after a storm. The rainbow is no accident. In the story of Noah, the bow in the cloud was the sign of God's covenant, his promise of mercy, his pledge that he would not again destroy. And here, around the throne of the one who rides the storm, the one whose chariot has just come sweeping in on the north wind, there shines that same bow, that same sign of mercy, that same arc of covenant color. Judgment and mercy meet at the throne, the storm and the rainbow are the same vision, and then Ezekiel names what he has seen in the only words that will hold it. This, he says, was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord, the kavod, the weight, the radiant heaviness of the divine presence, the glory of YHWH himself, enthroned above the crystal firmament, above the four living creatures, above the wheels within wheels, and their watching eyes, riding upon the chariot in the heart of the storm. And when he saw it, the priest did the only thing a creature can do in the presence of that glory. He fell on his face, he collapsed to the ground, and from above the throne a voice began to speak. Now, before we follow the tradition into the deep and dangerous waters it drew out of this vision, we have to stop and ask the question that the exiles themselves must have been asking. The question that gives the whole vision its meaning. Why? Why did this appear here, of all places? Why did the glory of the God of Israel come riding into Babylon, into the land of the conqueror, into the country of foreign gods, to be seen by a displaced priest on the banks of an irrigation canal? The answer is one of the most important theological turns in the entire Hebrew Bible, and most people miss it entirely because they are too busy marveling at the wheels. For the people of Judah, the presence of God had an address. He dwelt in the temple in Jerusalem, enthroned between the wings of the cherubim over the Ark of the Covenant in the innermost room, the Holy of Holies. That was his house. That was his throne on earth. And the unspoken assumption, the assumption that the catastrophe of exile had thrown into crisis, was that his presence and his power were tied to that place and to that land. If Jerusalem fell, had God fallen? If the temple were threatened, was he threatened? If they were dragged away to Babylon, had they been dragged away from him? And then the heavens open over Babylon, and the throne of God appears, and it has wheels. Do you understand the audacity of that image? The throne that the exiles imagined as fixed forever in one room in one city turns out to be a chariot. It moves. It is not chained to the temple. It is not confined to the land. It is not weaker in Babylon than it was in Jerusalem. The God of Israel has come, in person, in glory, to the place of exile, to be among his scattered and grieving people, to make unmistakably clear that he had not been defeated, and he had not been left behind, and he had not abandoned them. The mobile throne is a message, and the message is this: there is no place you can be carried where he cannot come. There is no exile beyond the reach of his chariot. His presence has wheels, and the book of Ezekiel will press this point to its breaking and its healing. Because in the chapters that follow, the same prophet who saw the chariot arrive in Babylon is given a vision of the chariot leaving Jerusalem. In a later vision, Ezekiel is carried in spirit to the temple itself, and he watches in horror as the glory of the Lord, the same glory, riding the same cherubim and the same wheels, rises up from the Holy of Holies, moves to the threshold of the temple, pauses at the east gate, and then departs, ascending from the midst of the city and standing upon the mountain to the east. The presence leaves, the glory withdraws, and only then, when the throne has gone, does the city fall to the Babylonians, as it would in history a few years later, in flames. This is the secret meaning of the mobile throne. The God of Israel was not captured when Jerusalem fell, because he had already left. He had not been defeated. He had withdrawn his presence in judgment, and he had carried that presence to his people in exile, riding the chariot from the doomed city to the foreign river. And the same book that records the departure of the glory ends, many chapters later, with a vision of its return, the glory of the Lord coming back from the east, the sound of his coming like the roar of many waters, the earth shining with his glory, the presence filling a new and restored temple, and a voice declaring that this is the place of his throne, where he will dwell among his people forever. The chariot comes. The chariot departs. The chariot returns. The whole sweep of the book of Ezekiel, from the river in Babylon to the restored sanctuary, is the journey of a throne that will not be confined and will not be lost. That is the answer to the exile's unspoken fear. And it is, if you let it be, an answer to fears far older and far more personal than theirs. There is something curious about the word we have been using for all of this. The chariot, the Merkabah, because if you search the first chapter of Ezekiel, the chapter that describes the whole vision in such relentless detail, you will not find that word anywhere in it. Ezekiel never calls it a chariot. He describes the creatures, the wheels, the firmament, the throne, the glory, but he never names the assembled whole. The word Merkabah, chariot, was placed upon the vision by the tradition that came after, the readers and the sages who looked at the throne, riding on the living wheels, and recognized it for what it was, a vehicle, a war chariot of the divine king, the Merkabah of the Most High. Where did they get the idea? Not from nowhere. The Hebrew scriptures already knew the image of God as a rider, a charioteer of the storm. The Psalms sing of the one who makes the clouds, his chariot, who rides upon the wings of the wind. And there is one passage in particular that gave the tradition its license. In the first book of Chronicles, when King David hands over to his son Solomon the plans for the temple, the text describes among those plans the design for the golden cherubim that would spread their wings over the Ark of the Covenant. And it calls them, in so many words, the chariot, the golden chariot of the cherubim that spread out their wings and covered the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. There it is. The cherubim over the ark were understood, even in the days of the first temple, not merely as guardians but as the chariot of God, the throne-bearers of the invisible king who was enthroned, as the scriptures say again and again, upon the cherubim. And so when Ezekiel sees living cherubim, four-faced, many-winged, carrying the sapphire throne on wheels that move in every direction, the tradition recognized the temple cherubim come alive and set in motion. The static golden chariot of the Holy of Holies had risen up, taken wing, and flown to Babylon. The Merkabah of the temple had become the Merkabah of the vision, and the name stuck. Ezekiel was not the only one, in those centuries, to be granted a vision of the throne. The imagery belongs to a whole stream of ancient Jewish writing about the heavens and the one who reigns there. In the book of Enoch, that vast and ancient collection of visions treasured among the Jews of the Second Temple period and preserved to this day, There is a description of the throne that reads almost like a companion to Ezekiel's. Enoch, carried up into the heavens, describes a great house built of crystal, its floor of crystal, and its ceiling like the path of the stars and lightnings, and within it a lofty throne, its appearance like crystal, and its wheels like the shining sun, and streams of flaming fire issuing out from beneath it, and the great glory seated upon it, his raiment brighter than the sun, and whiter than any snow, so that none of the angels could enter or look upon his face, for the splendor and the glory, crystal, wheels, fire flowing from the throne, the glory too bright to behold. The same family of images, the same trembling attempt to describe the indescribable, the same throne seen from a slightly different angle by a different seer. This is the world out of which the Merkabah tradition grew, a world in which the throne of God was a living reality that holy men were, on rare and terrifying occasions, permitted to glimpse. A world in which the heavens were not empty, but layered, full of palaces and gates and armies of angels, and, at the summit of it all, the chariot throne and the glory enthroned upon it. And it was a world in which to contemplate that throne, to study Ezekiel's first chapter and seek to understand what the priest had seen, came to be regarded not as ordinary Bible study, but as the most exalted and the most perilous of all spiritual undertakings. They gave it a name, Ma'ase Merkabah, the work of the chariot, and they surrounded it with warnings. To understand just how guarded this tradition became, we have to turn to the Mishnah, the foundational collection of rabbinic law compiled in the early centuries of the Common Era, and to one passage in particular in the tractate called Hagigah. It is one of the most famous and most restrictive statements in all of rabbinic literature, and it sets the boundary line around Ezekiel's vision in unmistakable terms. One may not expound, the Mishnah declares, the forbidden relations to three students at once. One may not expound the account of creation, the work of the beginning, to two. And one may not expound the chariot, the Merkabah, even to a single student, unless that student is a sage who understands of his own knowledge. Read that again, and feel the weight of it. The deepest secrets of the Torah are arranged here in ascending order of danger. Certain laws of forbidden relationships, too delicate to teach to a crowd. The account of creation, too profound to teach to more than one. And then, at the very summit, the work of the chariot, Ezekiel's vision of the throne, which may not be taught to even one person, not openly, not by full exposition, unless that single listener is already wise enough to understand the matter from his own insight, in which case the teacher may only pass on the chapter headings, the merest outline, and let the wise man grasp the rest for himself. And the Mishnah goes further, with a line that has chilled and fascinated readers for centuries. Whoever looks into four things, it says, it would have been better for him had he not come into the world. What is above? What is below? What is before? And what is behind? The four directions of inquiry into the divine mysteries, the very four directions in which the living creatures faced and the wheels rolled, are declared to be the kind of knowledge that can undo a person, that can make a man wish he had never been born. To peer too far above, beyond the firmament, into the realm of the throne, to peer below, before, behind, into the origins and boundaries of all things. The Mishnah does not say this knowledge is false. It says it is dangerous. Some questions, pressed too far, do not enlighten. They consume. And here that mysterious word returns, the word from the heart of the storm, chashmal. The Talmud, expanding on the Mishnah, preserves the story we mentioned at the very beginning, and now we can hear it in its proper place. There was once a child, the tradition relates, who was reading the book of Ezekiel in his teacher's house, and he came to understand the meaning of chashmal, that glowing, electric brightness at the center of the vision. And fire went forth from the chashmal and consumed him. After that, the sages sought to suppress the book of Ezekiel altogether, to hide it away, fearing what its mysteries might do to those who read them unprepared. But, the tradition adds, A certain sage named Hananiah ben Hezekiah took it upon himself to reconcile the difficulties, burning, it is said, a great quantity of midnight oil as he labored, and so the book was preserved among the scriptures rather than withdrawn. Think about what that story is telling us. The rabbis took this vision so seriously, regarded its power as so real, that they nearly removed the entire book of Ezekiel from public reading, rather than risk the harm it might do. Not because they doubted it, because they believed it. Because they held that the words of the chariot carried something live within them, a current, a brightness that could burn the unready as surely as fire burns dry tinder. The chashmal that consumed the child is the same chashmal that gleamed at the heart of the storm, and the warning is the same in both. Do not gaze too long, too directly, too unprepared into the brightness of the throne. Why such fear? What did the sages think would happen to a person who entered too deeply into the contemplation of the chariot? They did not have to imagine it. They had a story. The story of 4 men who entered the garden of mysteries, and of what became of each one. And it is to that story, perhaps the most sobering parable in all of Jewish mysticism, that we must turn next. The story is told in the Talmud, in that same tractate Hagigah, and it has come to be known by a single Hebrew word, pardes. The word means an orchard, a garden, an enclosed and cultivated paradise, and it is the very word from which, through Persian and Greek, our word paradise descends. But in the mouths of the mystics, pardes did not mean a literal garden. It meant the garden of divine mysteries, the secret enclosure of the deepest knowledge, the inner sanctum of the contemplation of God. To enter the pardes was to ascend in vision and understanding into the highest mysteries, into the very precincts of the throne. And the tradition records that 4 of the greatest sages of their generation entered the pardes together. 4 entered the orchard, the tradition says. Ben Azai and Ben Zoma, and the one called Aher and Rabbi Akiva. 4 men of immense learning and devotion, 4 masters of the Torah who together pressed into the garden of the highest mysteries. And the story records, with terrible brevity, what happened to each. Ben Azai gazed, and he died. Of him the tradition applies the verse from the Psalms, "Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his faithful ones." He looked upon what should not be looked upon by mortal eyes, and the sight took his life, and his death was counted precious, but it was death all the same. He did not return from the garden. Ben Zoma gazed, and he was stricken. The Hebrew suggests that he was harmed in his mind, that his reason was wounded, that he looked upon the mysteries and came back broken, his sanity shattered by what he had seen. Of him the tradition quotes the proverb, "Have you found honey? Eat only what is enough for you, lest you be filled with it and vomit it up." He took in more sweetness, more of the divine mystery than a human soul could hold, and it overwhelmed him. He survived, but he was never the same. The third, called Aher, which means simply the other, was once a great sage named Elisha ben Abuya, but after his entry into the garden, he is no longer called by his name. He is called only the other, because he became other, a stranger to his own faith. He entered the pardes, and in the searing image the tradition uses, he cut down the plantings. He became an apostate. Something he encountered in the highest realms, some confusion, some misreading of what he saw, led him to abandon the faith of his fathers, to fall into heresy, to ruin himself and trouble others. He lived, but his soul was lost. He gazed upon the garden, and he uprooted his own faith by the roots. And then there was the fourth, Rabbi Akiva, the greatest sage of his age, a man whose name towers over the whole of rabbinic tradition. And of him the story says, simply and beautifully, Rabbi Akiva entered in peace and departed in peace. He alone went into the garden of the highest mysteries and came out whole. He alone gazed upon what lay within and was neither killed, nor maddened, nor turned from his faith. He entered in peace, and he left in peace. What made the difference? The tradition gives us a clue, and it is worth holding on to. It records that when they were about to enter, Rabbi Akiva warned the others. "When you arrive," he said, "at the stones of pure marble, do not say, 'Water, water,' for it is written, 'He who speaks falsehood shall not be established before my eyes.'" The meaning is mysterious, as these things always are, but the warning seems to be this. In the ascent, you will come upon a place that gleams like water, a dazzling brilliance of pure marble that looks like a flood, like an ocean you cannot cross. And the unprepared soul will cry out in fear, "Water, water," and turn back or stumble, deceived by appearances, taking the solid radiance of the holy place for a danger that is not there. Do not be deceived. Do not name as water what is not water. Do not let the appearance overwhelm the truth. Akiva passed through because he did not mistake the brightness for a threat, because he kept his footing where the others lost theirs, because he entered the mysteries with a steadiness of soul that the others, for all their learning, did not possess. This is the cautionary tale that hovered over the entire tradition of the Chariot. The mysteries are real, the ascent is possible, but it is not safe. One man died, one man went mad, one man lost his faith, and only one, the steadiest and the holiest, returned in peace. The garden is real, and the garden is perilous, and not everyone who enters comes home. And yet, despite the warnings, despite the story of the four, the longing to ascend did not die. It grew. In the centuries that followed, there emerged within Judaism a whole body of mystical literature devoted to the ascent toward the throne, texts that scholars today group under the name Hekhalot literature, from the Hebrew word Hekhalot, palaces. For these writings imagined the journey to God's presence as a passage through a series of heavenly palaces, one within the next, each more glorious and more guarded than the last, until at the innermost chamber the mystic might behold the chariot and the one enthroned upon it. The dating of these texts is debated among scholars, and their authorship is uncertain. Some of the traditions within them may reach back to the early rabbinic period, while the documents in the form we now have them were likely composed and compiled across the long stretch of late antiquity and the early medieval centuries. But whatever their precise origin, they preserve a vision of the spiritual life that is unlike almost anything else. They describe practitioners who called themselves, in a striking and paradoxical phrase, the Yordei Merkabah, the descenders to the chariot. Descenders, even though they were ascending, going up through the heavens, perhaps because the deepest ascent into God was understood as a kind of descent into the innermost depths, a going down into the heart of the mystery, even as one rose through the palaces of light. The journey they described was not a gentle one. To ascend through the palaces, the mystic had to pass through a succession of gates, and at each gate stood fearsome angelic guardians, sentinels of fire and storm, terrible to behold, who would destroy the unworthy traveler who came without the proper preparation. To pass safely, the texts say, the mystic needed to know the secret names, to possess the seals, the divine names and formulas that, shown to the guardians at each threshold, would compel them to stand aside and let the traveler through. Palace by palace, gate by gate, seal by seal, the descender to the chariot made his perilous way inward and upward, surrounded by the roar of angelic praise, until at last he reached the innermost palace and stood before the throne. And what did they find there? An overwhelming liturgy. The Hekhalot texts are filled, page after page, with hymns, with torrents of praise, with the ceaseless song of the angels and the living creatures around the throne. The whole of heaven, in this vision, is one vast house of worship, ringing endlessly with the holiness of God, the Chariot singing the Ophanim, the wheels thundering their praise, the seraphim crying out, palace answering palace, in an unending symphony of adoration. The goal of the ascent was not merely to see, but to join, to add one's own voice, however briefly, to the song that the throne-bearers had been singing since before the world began. There was one strand within this literature, however, that the broader tradition regarded with deep unease, and honesty requires that we mention it. It is a text known as the Sheol Koma, which means roughly the measure of the body, or the measure of the stature. This controversial work took the human form upon the throne, the likeness, as it were, of a man that Ezekiel had glimpsed, and pressed it to an audacious and, to many, a scandalous extreme, describing the cosmic dimensions of the divine form in vast and specific terms, the immeasurable measurements of the body of the King of Kings. Many of the greatest authorities in later Judaism were profoundly troubled by this text. Some rejected it outright as a distortion, a dangerous literalizing of what was always meant to be understood as vision and metaphor, a crossing of the line that the tradition had so carefully drawn. Others sought to interpret it allegorically, as a coded meditation rather than a literal anatomy. The controversy itself tells us something important. Even within the mystical tradition, even among those who longed most ardently to ascend, there was a fierce and ongoing argument about how far one could go in describing the indescribable, about the boundary between reverent contemplation and presumptuous trespass. The line that the Mishnah had drawn around the chariot was contested ground, and it remained contested for centuries. Let us return now to the creatures and the wheels themselves, because something remarkable happened to them in the imagination of the tradition. They became angels, or rather, they came to be understood as distinct orders within the great hierarchy of the heavenly host, ranks of celestial beings, each with its own name and nature and place around the throne. We can watch this unfold within the book of Ezekiel itself. In the first chapter, the four-faced beings are called simply the living creatures, the Chariot. But later in the book, in the 10th chapter, Ezekiel sees them again, the same four faces, the same wheels, the same wings, and now he tells us plainly what they are. These, he says, are the Cherubim. The living creatures of the first vision and the Cherubim of the temple are one and the same. The four-faced throne-bearers are the Cherubim, the very beings whose golden images spread their wings over the ark in the Holy of Holies, the beings between whom the Lord was said to be enthroned. The chariot of the vision and the chariot of the temple are revealed to be the same chariot, and its bearers are the Cherubim. And in that 10th chapter, Ezekiel notices something that has puzzled and intrigued interpreters ever since. When he lists the four faces the second time, the list has changed. In the first chapter, the faces were the man, the lion, the ox, and the eagle. But in the 10th chapter, he writes that each had four faces, and the first was the face of a cherub, the second the face of a man, the third the face of a lion, and the fourth the face of an eagle. The ox is gone. In its place stands the face of a cherub. The ox of the first vision has become the cherub of the second. Why? The plain sense of the change has occupied many minds, but the rabbis preserved a striking and tender explanation, and whether or not we take it as the literal cause, it reveals something beautiful about how they read the heart of God. The ox face, they reasoned, recalled the great sin of Israel, the golden calf, the young ox of gold that the people had made and worshipped at the foot of Sinai while Moses was on the mountain. And so, the tradition imagined, Ezekiel pleaded with God to change that face, because as long as one of the throne-bearers wore the face of an ox, it stood before the divine presence as a perpetual reminder, a kind of standing accusation of Israel's most shameful betrayal. And in mercy, the tradition holds, God replaced the ox face with the face of a cherub, removing from before his own throne the image that recalled his people's sin. Whether or not we read it so, the instinct behind it is profound. Even the faces around the throne, in the rabbinic imagination, are touched by mercy. Even there, the memory of sin can be transformed. The wheels, too, were given a name and a rank. In the 10th chapter, Ezekiel hears the wheels called by a name, the galgal, the whirling thing, the wheelwork. And, in the developing angelology of Judaism, the wheels of the chariot became an order of angels in their own right, the ophanim, which means simply the wheels, the wheel angels, the many-eyed ones who turn beneath the throne. Alongside the cherubim and the seraphim, the ophanim took their place among the highest ranks of the heavenly host, the throne-bearers, the wheels of the chariot lifted up into the company of the holiest angels. In the ancient book of Enoch, these three are named together as the sleepless ones, the cherubim, the seraphim, and the ophanim, the wakeful guardians who never close their eyes, who surround the throne of glory and keep eternal watch and never cease from their song. And that brings us to the seraphim, and to another prophet, in another century, who was given his own vision of the throne, a vision that the tradition would forever read together with Ezekiel's, as two windows into the same eternal reality. More than a century before Ezekiel stood by the river in Babylon, the prophet Isaiah had a vision in the temple in Jerusalem, and what he saw belongs to the same family as the chariot, though it wears a different face. In the year that King Uzziah died, Isaiah writes, "He saw the Lord seated upon a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above the throne stood the seraphim, the burning ones." For that is what the name seraphim means, the ones who burn, the fiery angels. Each of them had 6 wings. With 2 they covered their faces, for not even these blazing creatures could bear to look directly upon the glory. With 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. And they called out to one another antiphonally, one to another, in the cry that has echoed through every house of worship in the Western world ever since. "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. Holy, 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 3 times holy." The threefold cry that the seraphim sing around Isaiah's throne. And the foundations of the thresholds shook at the voice of the one who cried, and the house was filled with smoke, and Isaiah, like Ezekiel, was undone, crying out that he was a man of unclean lips, dwelling among a people of unclean lips, for his eyes had seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Now set the 2 visions side by side, Ezekiel by the river, with his 4 living creatures, each with 4 faces, the man and lion and ox and eagle, and the wheels and the sapphire throne. Isaiah in the temple, with his 6-winged seraphim crying, "Holy, holy, holy," around the high and lifted up throne. 2 prophets, 2 centuries apart, 2 settings, and yet the same essential reality, a throne exalted above all. Living, burning, winged beings surrounding it, creatures so overwhelmed by the divine glory that they shield themselves even as they serve. And, at the center, the King, the Lord of hosts, whose presence shakes the foundations and fills the temple and rides the storm. The tradition did not hesitate to read them together, to weave the 4 faces of Ezekiel and the 6 wings of Isaiah and the threefold holy into a single tapestry of the throne. And as we will see, there was a 3rd seer, centuries later still, who would gather all of these threads together into one final vision and place it at the climax of the Christian scriptures. But before we reach him, we should pause on a single, staggering idea that the rabbis attached to the throne itself, an idea that lifts the Merkabah out of time altogether. For the sages taught that certain things were created before the world was made, that they existed already in the mind and plan of God before the first day of creation, before light, before the heavens and the earth. And among the things they listed as created or conceived before the world, alongside the Torah, and repentance, and the Garden of Eden, and the name of the Messiah, they placed the throne of glory, the Kizeh HaKavod. The throne of glory, they taught, was there before the beginning, established before the foundation of the world, the eternal seat of the eternal King, prepared from before all things. Think about what that means for Ezekiel's vision. The throne he saw riding into Babylon on the living wheels was not a thing that came into being at some moment in the past. It was, in the rabbinic imagination, older than creation itself, the primordial seat of God's own sovereignty, the throne from which he reigned before there was a universe to reign over, and from which he reigns still, and from which he will reign when all things are made new. The chariot that came to comfort the exiles was a glimpse of something more ancient than the stars. The priest by the river was looking at the foundation of all reality, the throne that was before the beginning and that abides beyond the end. Not everyone who pondered the chariot was a mystic seeking to ascend. There was another stream, a great current of Jewish thought that approached the vision with a very different temperament, the temperament of the philosopher, and its towering figure was Moses Maimonides, the brilliant rabbi, physician, and philosopher of the 12th century, known to tradition by the acronym Rambam. Maimonides took the Mishnah's warning with the utmost seriousness, but he understood the work of the chariot in a way that would have surprised the descenders to the throne. For Maimonides, the work of the chariot was not a literal journey through palaces and gates. It was metaphysics. It was the highest philosophy, the deepest possible inquiry into the nature of God and the structure of reality, the realm of knowledge so profound and so easily misunderstood that the ancient sages had wisely surrounded it with restrictions, teaching it only to the rare individual prepared to receive it, and even then, only in hints and chapter headings. In his great philosophical work, The Guide for the Perplexed, Maimonides took up the vision of Ezekiel, but he did so with extreme caution, warning his readers again and again that he could only allude, only gesture, only scatter the keys to understanding across his pages rather than hand them over plainly, lest he transgress the ancient prohibition against expounding the chariot openly. And his interpretation was sober, austere, intellectual. He read the creatures and the wheels and the throne not as a heavenly machine, but as a coded representation of the deepest truths about God and the cosmos, as he understood them, the immaterial intelligences that govern the heavens, the celestial spheres of the medieval universe, the layered structure of reality, ascending from the physical world up toward the pure and bodiless reality of God. The chariot, for Maimonides, was philosophy in disguise, the secrets of metaphysics wrapped in the imagery of vision, so that only the wise and prepared could unfold them. He was deeply concerned, above all, to guard against any literalism that would imagine God as having a body, a form, a location, for the central conviction of his thought was that God is utterly beyond all physical likeness, beyond image, beyond form, beyond any comparison with created things. To Maimonides, the human figure on the throne was the most dangerous image of all if taken literally, and the whole purpose of careful interpretation was to lift the reader beyond the image to the formless reality it could only point toward. Here, then, were two great paths winding away from the same mountain. The mystics, who took the imagery as the gateway to a real ascent, a genuine experience of the throne, and who sought through preparation and purity and the secret names to rise through the heavens and behold the glory. And the philosophers, who took the imagery as the veil over the deepest truths of metaphysics, and who sought through disciplined reason to penetrate beyond the veil to the bodiless reality of God. Vision and reason. Ascent and analysis, both of them standing before Ezekiel's chariot, both of them trembling at its power, both of them convinced that here, in these strange four faces and turning wheels, lay something close to the very center of all that can be known about God. And there was yet a third path, the path of the Kabbalists, the mystical tradition that flowered in medieval Spain and Provence and gathered itself into the great work known as the Zohar. The Kabbalists wove the creatures and the wheels into their vast and intricate vision of the inner life of God, the unfolding of the divine reality through its emanations and attributes, the worlds upon worlds descending from the hidden infinite down toward the world we inhabit. In their cosmology, the Chariot and the Ophanim, the living creatures and the wheels, were given their place among the orders of the heavenly worlds, ranks in the great chain of being that links the throne above to the earth below. For them, as for the descenders to the chariot before them, Ezekiel's vision was not a single ancient event, but a permanent map of reality, a description of the structure of the heavens, that the soul might learn to read and, in reading, draw nearer to its source. We have followed the chariot deep into the world of Jewish mysticism and philosophy, but the vision of the throne did not stay within the bounds of one tradition. It crossed over, and, to follow it across, we travel forward more than 6 centuries from Ezekiel to a rocky island in the Aegean Sea called Patmos, where an exile of a different age and a different faith was given a vision that gathers up Ezekiel and Isaiah both, and sets them at the foundation of the Christian scriptures. The exile's name was John, and the book he wrote is the Revelation, the Apocalypse, the Unveiling, the final book of the Christian Bible. And, at its heart, in its 4th chapter, John is caught up in the Spirit through an open door in heaven, and he sees a throne. Notice already the echo. Ezekiel saw the heavens opened. John sees a door standing open in heaven, and through it, a throne, and one seated on the throne, whose appearance, John says, was like jasper and carnelian, gleaming stones of light, and around the throne a rainbow that looked like an emerald. The rainbow again, the same ark of covenant color that wreathed the throne in Ezekiel's vision, now encircles the throne in John's. Around the central throne, John sees 24 lesser thrones, and on them 24 elders in white robes with crowns of gold. From the throne come flashes of lightning and rumblings and peals of thunder, the storm of Ezekiel transposed into a new key. And before the throne, there is something like a sea of glass, clear as crystal, the crystal firmament of Ezekiel now spread out as a shining glassy sea before the feet of God. And around the throne, John sees them, 4 living creatures. But now something has shifted in the way they appear, and the shift is illuminating. In Ezekiel, each of the 4 creatures bore all 4 faces, the man and lion and ox and eagle together on every one. But in John's vision, the 4 faces have been distributed, one to each creature. The first living creature, John says, was like a lion. The second was like an ox. The third had a face like a man. And the fourth was like a flying eagle. The same 4 faces, the man, the lion, the ox, the eagle. But now each creature wears one of them, 4 distinct beings around the throne, the lion and the ox and the man and the eagle, the 4 kings of creation now standing as 4 guardians at the 4 sides of the throne of God. And they have, John tells us, 6 wings, not the 4 wings of Ezekiel's creatures, but the 6 wings of Isaiah's seraphim. John has fused the 2 visions. He has taken the 4 faces of Ezekiel's chariot and joined them to the 6 wings of Isaiah's seraphim, blending the chariot and the temple throne into a single image. And the creatures are full of eyes, all around and within, the many eyes of Ezekiel's wheels now covering the bodies of the living creatures themselves. Everywhere, eyes, the all-seeing vigilance of heaven. And what do? They do the one thing all the throne-bearers have always done. Day and night, John says, they never cease to sing. And their song is the song of the seraphim, the threefold cry that Isaiah heard, carried now across the centuries into John's vision. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. The same 3 times holy that shook the temple in Isaiah's day rings out around the throne in John's. And whenever the living creatures give glory and honor and thanks to the one on the throne, the 24 elders fall down before him and cast their crowns before the throne and worship, crying out that he is worthy, the Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power, for he created all things, and by his will they existed and were created. Do you see how the threads have all been gathered into one? The throne of Ezekiel, the seraphim, and the threefold holy of Isaiah. the crystal expanse, now a sea of glass, the rainbow of mercy, the four faces, the four kings of creation, the many eyes, and at the center, the one who was and is to come, worshipped without ceasing, because he is the maker of all. The vision that came to comfort a priest by a Babylonian river has become, in John's revelation, the eternal liturgy of heaven, the worship that never stops, the song around the throne at the end of all things, which is also the song that was sung before the beginning. It was these four living creatures, the lion and the ox and the man and the eagle, gathered around the throne in John's revelation, that the early Christians took up and made into one of the most enduring symbols in all of Christian art and thought. For very early in the life of the church, Christian teachers looked at the four faces and saw in them the four Gospels, the fourfold witness to Christ, four distinct portraits of one Lord, just as four distinct faces surrounded one throne. The connection was made already in the 2nd century. Irenaeus, the Bishop of Lyon, writing around the year 180, argued that it was fitting and not accidental that there were four Gospels, neither more nor fewer, and he tied this fourfold Gospel directly to the four living creatures around the throne. As there are four corners of the earth and four chief winds, he reasoned, so the church, scattered throughout the whole world, rests upon four pillars, the four Gospels, breathing out immortality on every side. The four faces of the living creatures became, in his hands, an image of the four evangelists, each gazing upon the one Lord from his own direction, each bearing one face of the fourfold witness. Now, it must be said plainly that the early teachers did not all agree on which face belonged to which gospel, and the variations are themselves a part of the story. Irenaeus paired them one way. Augustine, the great bishop of Hippo, arranged them differently, and it was Jerome, the translator of the Latin Bible, whose assignment eventually became the standard one in the Western Church, the arrangement carved into countless cathedrals and painted into countless manuscripts down the centuries. In that standard arrangement, the man, or the angel, was assigned to Matthew because his gospel opens with the human genealogy and birth of Jesus, tracing his descent through the generations of men. The lion was assigned to Mark because his gospel opens with the voice crying in the wilderness, the roar of the herald, the untamed power of the kingdom breaking in. The ox, the animal of sacrifice and priestly service, was assigned to Luke because his gospel opens in the temple, with the priest Zechariah at the altar of incense, and dwells so deeply on the sacrificial heart of Christ's work. And the eagle, the bird that soars highest and gazes straight into the sun, was assigned to John, because his gospel soars highest of all, beginning not with a genealogy or a wilderness or a temple, but in the heights of eternity itself, with the Word who was in the beginning with God, and who was God. A man, a lion, an ox, an eagle, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The four faces of Ezekiel's creatures gathered around the throne in John's revelation became in Christian eyes the four faces of the gospel, four angles upon the single mystery of Christ, and you can find them to this day at the four corners of medieval gospel books and carved above the doors of ancient churches, the winged man and the winged lion and the winged ox and the eagle, surrounding the lamb or the cross or the figure of Christ in glory. The tradition gave this fourfold image a name, the tetramorph, the four-formed one, and it became one of the great visual signatures of Christian devotion, a direct descendant of the chariot Ezekiel saw by the Babylonian river. And there is a deeper logic in it, beyond the assignment of faces to gospels. For if the four creatures represent the fullness of creation, the wild and the tame, the soaring and the earthbound, the human and the beast, then to place them around Christ is to say that all of creation gazes upon him, that he is the center toward whom every order of life is turned, that the lion's strength and the ox's service and the eagle's vision and the human capacity to know God all find their meaning and their convergence in him. The same four faces that carried the throne in Babylon now surround the throne of the Lamb, and creation, in all its fourfold fullness, bows toward its King. The creatures and the wheels found a place not only in Christian art, but in Christian thought about the angels. For just as Judaism developed its ranks of cherubim and seraphim and ophanim, so Christianity developed its own account of the orders of the heavenly host. And the most influential of these accounts came from a mysterious writer known to history as Dionysius the Areopagite. The works attributed to him appeared in the early centuries of the Church, claiming to come from the Athenian convert mentioned in the Book of Acts. Those scholars now understand them to be the work of a later author writing under that honored name, somewhere around the late 5th or early 6th century. Whatever his true identity, his influence was immense. In his treatise on the celestial hierarchy, he arranged the angels into 9 orders, grouped in 3 triads, ascending toward God. At the very summit of that hierarchy, closest to the divine presence, he placed 3 orders. The seraphim, the burning ones of Isaiah's vision, whose name he understood to signify their fiery love and their ceaseless ardor, forever blazing around the throne. The cherubim, whose name he connected with the fullness of knowledge and the outpouring of wisdom, the beings of vast understanding who gaze most deeply into the splendor of God. And the thrones, the third of the highest orders, the bearers of God, the ones upon whom, in a sense, the divine majesty rests. And many in the tradition connected these thrones with the wheels of Ezekiel, the ophanim, so that the very wheels of the chariot, the turning, many-eyed wheels by the river in Babylon, took their place among the 3 highest orders of angels in Christian thought, the throne-bearers nearest to the glory of God. Consider what the names themselves were taken to mean, because the tradition heard in them a whole spirituality. The seraphim burn. They are love, pure and unceasing, the fire of adoration that never goes out. The cherubim know. They are wisdom, the depth of understanding, the gaze that beholds the truth of God most fully. And the thrones, the wheels, the ophanim, bear and uphold and serve, carrying the presence wherever it wills to go. Love, knowledge, and service, blazing at the heart of heaven nearest to the throne, the fiery love of the seraphim, the deep knowing of the cherubim, the faithful bearing of the wheels, the whole of the holy life, in a sense, mapped onto the orders around the throne. To be near to God, in this ancient vision, is to burn with love, to be filled with the knowledge of Him, and to bear His presence faithfully into every direction the Spirit might send you. And all of them, in every tradition that contemplated them, are doing the same thing. They are not idle. They are not still. They burn and they know and they bear, and above all they worship, ceaselessly, the seraphim crying holy, the cherubim gazing into the glory, the wheels turning beneath the throne, the whole of heaven bent in a single direction, toward the one who sits upon the sapphire seat. Whatever else the creatures and the wheels are, they are worshippers. The chariot is, before it is anything else, a moving sanctuary, a temple on wheels, and everything in it is caught up in adoration. Let us return, for a long and quiet moment, to the wheels themselves, and to that phrase that has lodged itself in the imagination of every reader who has ever encountered it: a wheel within a wheel. There is something about that image that refuses to leave the mind once it has entered. It is strange, it is impossible to fully picture, and perhaps that impossibility is precisely the point. For the chariot of God is not meant to be a thing you can fully diagram. It is not a machine whose blueprint you can draw. The wheel within a wheel resists your attempt to pin it down, and in resisting, it teaches you something. It teaches you that the workings of the divine throne are not finally comprehensible to a creature standing on the riverbank. You can see it. You can describe it, as Ezekiel did, piling up his likenesses and his as it wears. But you cannot reduce it to a mechanism. The wheel within a wheel is a door that opens onto mystery, and every generation that has tried to walk all the way through that door has found that it opens onto more than the mind can hold. And yet, the meaning of the wheels, even where their mechanism eludes us, is luminous. They speak of motion without limitation. Recall again what Ezekiel saw. The wheels moved in any of their 4 directions without turning. They did not need to swerve. They did not need to double back. They did not need to reorient themselves, because they were already oriented in every direction at once. Wherever the Spirit willed to go, instantly, the wheels were ready, gliding north or south or east or west with the same immediate ease. And this is a parable of the freedom of God. An earthly king's chariot is bound by the road, by the turning of its wheels, by the need to steer and to slow and to change its course. But the chariot of the King of Heaven goes wherever he wills, the moment he wills, with nothing to hinder and nothing to turn aside. He is not bound by roads. He is not confined to one direction. He is not stuck in Jerusalem when his people are in Babylon. The wheels within wheels are the freedom of the divine presence given visible form. And then there are the eyes, the rims full of eyes round about. Sit with that image, too. The wheels of the throne are covered with eyes, so that the chariot does not merely move in every direction, it sees in every direction. There is no blind spot in the throne of God. There is no angle from which one could approach it unseen, no direction it travels in darkness. Wherever the chariot goes, it goes with open eyes, watching, knowing, aware, and the comfort and the terror of that are bound together. For if the throne sees in every direction, then there is no place where you are unseen by God, no exile so distant, no darkness so deep, no corner so forgotten that the eyes of the throne do not reach it. The same all-seeing vigilance that should make the proud tremble is the very thing that should make the lost and the lonely take heart. You are not unseen. The wheels have eyes. And wherever the chariot of his presence rolls, it rolls watching over you. The whole of it then, the 4 faces and the 4 wings and the gleaming feet and the joined wingtips, the wheels within wheels and the rims full of eyes and the spirit that moves them all as one, the crystal firmament and the sapphire throne and the figure wrapped in fire and rainbow, all of it together is straining to say a few things that the mind can barely contain. That God is free, bound to no place, that God sees, blind to no direction. That God is glorious beyond all describing, so that even the prophet who saw him could only stammer in likenesses and fall on his face. And that all of creation, every face and every order of life, is gathered up beneath his throne in ceaseless, willing worship. That is the chariot. That is what the priest saw by the river. That is the Merkabah. This vision did not remain locked in ancient scrolls and rabbinic academies. It traveled down through the centuries and lodged itself deep in the imagination of ordinary believers, sometimes in the most unexpected places. Among the enslaved African Americans of the southern United States, who knew exile and bondage in their own flesh, and who read their own longing into the old stories of Scripture, the wheels of Ezekiel became the subject of a beloved spiritual. They sang of Ezekiel, who saw the wheel, way up in the middle of the air, the big wheel running by faith and the little wheel running by the grace of God, a wheel within a wheel, way in the middle of the air. They had grasped something true and deep about the vision, perhaps more truly than many a learned commentator. For a people in bondage, the chariot that came riding to the exiles in Babylon, the throne that was not bound to any one place, the presence that moved freely wherever the Spirit willed, was a song of hope. If God's throne had wheels, then God could come even here, even into the cotton fields, even into the cabins, even into the suffering of the enslaved. The wheel within a wheel became a song of deliverance. And in that they had read Ezekiel exactly right. In more recent times, of course, the strangeness of the vision has drawn other kinds of attention. Some modern readers, struck by the wheels and the gleaming metal and the wings and the noise like a great rushing, have proposed that what Ezekiel saw was not a divine throne at all, but some kind of machine, a craft, even a visitor from beyond the stars. And there have been popular books and theories built around this idea, attempts to reconstruct the vision as a piece of technology described by a man who had no words for engines and aircraft. It is worth acknowledging that these readings exist, because they are part of how the vision has echoed in our own age, and because the very fact that people reach for them shows how powerfully strange and how stubbornly concrete Ezekiel's description really is. This is no vague and misty dream. It is a detailed, almost engineer-like attempt to describe something the prophet clearly believed he had truly seen. But to read the chariot as a machine is to miss what the vision itself is at pains to tell us. For Ezekiel does not leave us in any doubt about what he saw. He does not say, "This was the appearance of a craft," or "This was a vehicle of unknown make." He tells us, in the plainest words he can find, what the whole vision was. "This," he writes, "was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord." It is a throne. It is a worship scene. It is the self-disclosure of the living God to a grieving exile, surrounded by living creatures who cry out in adoration and wheels that turn in praise beneath a sapphire seat. The point of the vision is not the mechanism. The point is the majesty enthroned at its center, and the message he came to deliver, that he had not abandoned his people, that his presence is free, that his glory fills not only the temple, but the whole earth, and every place his chariot may go. To reduce that to a flying machine is to stare so hard at the wheels that you never lift your eyes to the throne, and the whole architecture of the vision is built to lift your eyes to the throne. There is a way of reading the four faces that turns the vision inward, and the contemplatives of many ages have followed it. For if the lion and the ox and the eagle and the man represent the fullness of creation gathered before the throne, they can also be read as a portrait of the fullness that each human soul is called to carry. Consider what each face has long been taken to mean. The lion is courage, strength, the royal boldness that does not shrink back. The ox is patient endurance, the willingness to labor and to serve, to bear the yoke faithfully day after day without applause. The eagle is vision, the capacity to rise above the immediate and see from a height, to fix the gaze on what is far off and high and bright. And the man is reason and reverence, the distinctly human capacity to know God, to name him, to stand before him in understanding and in love. The whole soul, the ancient readers suggested, needs all four. Courage without endurance burns out. Endurance without vision becomes mere drudgery. Vision without the humble service of the ox becomes a soaring detached from the ground. And all of it must be gathered and governed by the human face, the reason and reverence that turn the whole life toward God. To be whole is to have all four faces turned, in the end, in the same direction, toward the throne. The lion's courage, the ox's service, the eagle's vision, the human heart's reverence, all of them facing the glory, all of them moving wherever the Spirit wills, all of them bearing the presence of God into the world. That is what it might mean for a person to become, in a small and earthly way, a bearer of the chariot. A soul in which courage and endurance and vision and reverence are joined like wingtips and move as one. And what governs them, in the vision and in the soul alike, is the Spirit. Remember the line that Ezekiel could not stop repeating, the line that explained all the impossible unity of the moving chariot. The spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. Wherever the Spirit would go, they went. The creatures and the wheels did not move by their own scattered impulses, each pulling in its own direction. They moved as one because one Spirit animated them all. One will directed the whole, so that the four faces and the four wheels and the joined wings all glided together in flawless harmony, never colliding, never contradicting, never working against themselves. And this, too, is a parable of the soul made whole, the divided self, pulled four ways at once, the courage warring with the caution, the labor at odds with the longing, the vision detached from the daily service, is a chariot whose wheels are fighting each other and going nowhere. But the soul in which one spirit governs all, in which every faculty is turned toward God and moved by his will, becomes a chariot that moves in unity, that goes wherever the Spirit sends it, that bears the presence faithfully and freely. The wholeness of the chariot is the wholeness offered to every soul that yields itself to the one Spirit who moves the wheels. Now we should return to the warnings, because they deserve a second hearing, and because there is wisdom in them for anyone who has ever felt drawn to the deep things of God. Why did the sages guard the chariot so fiercely? Why did they nearly hide the book of Ezekiel away? Why did they tell the story of the four who entered the garden, one dead, one mad, one apostate, only one returning whole? What were they afraid of? They were not afraid that the vision was false. They were afraid that it was true, and that the truth of it was more than an unprepared soul could safely bear. They had watched, perhaps, what happens to people who reach too quickly and too greedily for the highest things, who seek the experience of the divine without the slow and humbling work of becoming the kind of person who can receive it. They had seen the ones who entered the garden hungry for vision and came out broken by it. And so they built their fences, not to keep people away from God, but to keep people from being destroyed by an encounter they were not ready to survive. Have you found honey? The proverb warned Ben Zoma. Eat only what is enough for you, lest you be filled and sickened by it. There is such a thing as too much sweetness taken too fast. There is such a thing as a glory that the unready cannot hold. And the difference in the story of the four between the one who returned in peace and the three who did not was not finally a difference of learning. All four were great sages. The difference was something deeper, a steadiness of soul, a humility, a readiness to pass through the dazzling places without crying out water, water and stumbling, a willingness to be small before the greatness one had come to see. Rabbi Akiva entered in peace and departed in peace, and the tradition seems to suggest that he did so because he was, in himself, a man at peace, a man whose soul was ordered and humble and steady enough to behold the glory and not be shattered by it. The preparation that the mystics demanded, the purity, the fasting, the long apprenticeship, the secret names learned only after years, was all in service of becoming the kind of person who could enter the garden and come home. There is something here worth carrying away, even for those of us who will never attempt any mystical ascent, who only encounter the chariot by reading the ancient words and turning them over in the quiet of an ordinary evening. It is this: the deepest things of God are not grasped by grasping. The highest glory is not seized by the greedy. The vision of the throne is given to the humble, to the steady, to the ones who have done the slow and unglamorous work of ordering their souls and turning their faces, all four faces, toward God. You do not storm the chariot, you are carried to it, as Ezekiel was, by grace, when the heavens open in their own time, and the right posture before it is the one the priest took the moment he saw it. He fell on his face, not in terror only, but in worship. The chariot is not a prize to be won, it is a glory to be adored, and the soul that comes to it adoring rather than grasping is the soul that, like Akiva, enters in peace and departs in peace. We should linger longer on the journey of the glory, because the book of Ezekiel makes it the very spine of its message, and few things in all of Scripture are more poignant. The same prophet who saw the chariot arrive in Babylon was given, in a later vision, the sight of the glory departing from Jerusalem, and the way it departs is unbearably tender. In that vision, Ezekiel is carried in the spirit to the temple in Jerusalem, and he is shown the corruption that has filled the holy house, the idolatries practiced in secret, the elders burning incense to false images in hidden chambers, the people who have turned their backs on the presence even as they stand in its courts. And then he watches the glory begin to move. The glory of the God of Israel, riding upon the cherubim, the same four-faced creatures, the same wheels, rises up from above the cherubim, where it had dwelt over the ark, and it goes to the threshold of the house. It pauses there, at the doorway, as if reluctant to leave. Then the cherubim lift their wings, and the wheels rise beside them, and the glory moves from the threshold and stands above the cherubim. And then it rises again, and goes to the east gate of the house of the Lord. And then, at last, the glory of the Lord goes up from the midst of the city, and comes to rest upon the mountain that is on the east side of the city, the Mount of Olives, lingering there above the doomed city before it departs entirely. Read the movement slowly. The glory does not flee. It does not vanish in an instant. It withdraws by stages, pausing at the threshold, pausing at the gate, pausing upon the mountain, as though giving the city every possible moment to repent, every possible chance to turn back before the presence is finally gone. It is the picture of a love that does not want to leave, that goes only because it has been driven out, that departs grieving by inches, with backward glances, and only when the glory has gone does the judgment fall. Only when the throne has withdrawn does Jerusalem become vulnerable to the fire that would consume it a few short years later, when the Babylonian armies returned and burned the temple to the ground. This is the heart of Ezekiel's terrible mercy. The God of Israel was not defeated when the temple burned, because he had already gone, withdrawn in sorrow before the end. He was not caught in the flames. He had carried his presence out of the dying city and brought it, on the wheels of the chariot, to the exiles by the river, the very vision with which the book began. The arrival in Babylon and the departure from Jerusalem are two halves of one story, and the story says that the presence of God goes where his people are, even into exile, even into loss, even into the lands of their captivity, rather than remaining behind in a building that has become a tomb. And the book does not end in departure. Many chapters later, in the great closing vision of a restored temple, Ezekiel sees the glory return. He stands at the east gate, and he sees the glory of the God of Israel coming from the east, and the sound of his coming is like the sound of many waters, the same roar he heard from the wings of the creatures by the river, and the earth shines with his glory. And the glory of the Lord enters the temple by the gate that faces east, the same direction by which it had departed, and the presence fills the house. And a voice speaks to the prophet and says that this is the place of his throne and the place of the soles of his feet, where he will dwell in the midst of his people forever. The chariot that left the burning city returns to the restored one. The glory that withdrew comes back. The presence that went into exile with his people comes home with them and takes its seat again, and declares that this time it will dwell among them without end. Departure and return. Exile and homecoming. The whole arc of the chariot is the arc of a God who will not finally lose his people and will not finally be lost to them. Let us return one last time to that mysterious word, chashmal, the gleaming brightness at the very center of the vision, the fire that seemed almost to be metal, the metal that seemed almost to be fire. We have seen how the rabbis treated it with awe and fear, how the child who understood it was said to have been consumed, how the sages nearly hid the book away because of it. The word appears only 3 times in the entire Hebrew Bible, all of them in Ezekiel, all of them describing the radiance at the heart of the glory, and its precise meaning was lost to the ordinary understanding even in ancient times, which is exactly why it became a byword for the most dangerous and dazzling depths of the vision. The rabbis, ever attentive to the music of words, sometimes broke chashmal apart and heard in it hidden meanings. Some read it as a fusion of 2 ideas, of silence and of speech, of stillness and of utterance, the living creatures falling silent and then speaking, the brightness that is at once hushed and resounding. Some heard in it the names of fiery beings, the chashmalim, an order of angels named for that very radiance, beings of speaking fire who dwell nearest the brightness of the throne. Whatever the truth of these readings, they all circle the same intuition, that at the very center of the vision is a brightness that the mind cannot finally master, a glory that is fire and light and substance and silence and speech all at once, a radiance so intense that to understand it too well is to be undone by it. And here is a small wonder of history, a quiet irony that the ancient sages could never have foreseen. When the Hebrew language was revived in the modern age and needed a word for a new and invisible power that men had learned to harness, a power of light and fire and energy, of crackling brightness that could illuminate and could also kill, the word that was chosen was chashmal. To this day, in modern Hebrew, chashmal is the everyday word for electricity, the same word that named the unbearable brightness at the heart of Ezekiel's chariot, the word the rabbis feared, the word that consumed the child in the story, now names the current that runs through the wires of every home. There is no doctrine in this, no hidden teaching, but there is a kind of poetry in it that is hard to ignore. The ancient word for the brightness of the throne became the modern word for the lightning we live by, as though some faint memory of that primordial radiance still flickers in the most ordinary glow of an evening lamp. It is a reminder, in its small way, of how deeply this vision has woven itself into the fabric of human imagination, into language and art and song and devotion, across nearly 3,000 years. The four faces watch from the corners of medieval manuscripts. The wheels turn through the spirituals of the enslaved. The threefold holy rings in the liturgies of synagogues and churches across the world. The mystics ascended toward the throne, and the philosophers reasoned toward it. The poets sang of it, and the painters labored to depict it, and still the word for its brightness lives, unrecognized. In the lights we switch on every night without a thought. The chariot rolls on through human memory, carrying its glory, watched by its many eyes, and it has never come to rest. There is a moment in the vision that is easy to rush past, and yet it may be the most important moment of all. After the storm, and the creatures, and the wheels, and the throne, after the fire and the rainbow and the overwhelming sight of the glory, after the priest has fallen on his face, something changes. The roar subsides. Ezekiel had described the sound of the wings as like the roar of many waters, like the tumult of an army, deafening, overwhelming. But then, he says, when the creatures stood still, they let down their wings, and there was a stillness. And out of that stillness, from above the firmament over their heads, a voice spoke. First, the overwhelming spectacle, then the stillness, and then the word. This is the rhythm of the encounter. And it is worth attending to, because it tells us what all the glory was finally for. The vision was not given to Ezekiel merely so that he could see something magnificent. It was given so that he could hear something, so that out of the silence after the storm, a voice could speak to him, a word could come, a calling could be laid upon his life. And the word that came was a commission. The voice told the fallen priest to stand on his feet, and it sent him, as a prophet, to speak to his people, to carry a message to the exiles among whom he sat. The whole towering vision of the chariot resolves, in the end, into a voice and a vocation. The glory appears, and then the glory speaks, and then the one who has seen it is sent. There is a deep pattern here that runs all through Scripture. The overwhelming encounter gives way to a quiet word, and the quiet word gives way to ascending. Isaiah saw the throne and the seraphim and cried out that he was undone. And then a voice asked, "Whom shall I send?" And Isaiah answered, "Here am I, send me." Moses saw the burning bush and hid his face, and then a voice spoke and sent him to Pharaoh. The pattern repeats. First the glory that brings a man to his knees, then the stillness, then the voice. Then the calling that lifts him to his feet and sends him out. The vision is never finally about the seeing alone. It is about the word that comes after the seeing, and the life that is reshaped by that word. And one line from this part of Ezekiel's experience entered the worship of his people forever. As the glory moved, the prophet heard behind him a great rushing sound, and the words that have echoed in the synagogue from that day to this. Blessed be the glory of the Lord from his place. Blessed be the glory of the Lord from his place. It became part of the sacred liturgy, part of the song with which the gathered people answer the holiness of God, joining their voices on earth to the song of the creatures and the wheels and the burning ones around the throne. The vision that nearly killed the unprepared, the chariot that the sages forbade to teach openly, gave to the ordinary worshipper this one simple, blessed line, a way of joining, however faintly, the eternal praise that surrounds the throne of glory. Blessed be the glory of the Lord from his place, wherever that place may be, in the highest heaven, or in the heart of exile, or in the quiet of a single soul that has turned its face toward him. And now, having followed the chariot through scripture and tradition, through the mystics and the philosophers, through the synagogue and the cathedral, through the spirituals of the enslaved, and the very word we use for electricity, let us bring it home, to the place where it began, and to the place where you are sitting now. It began with an exile, a man who had lost the center of his life, whose temple lay far away, whose calling had been stripped from him, who sat by a foreign river among a grieving people who feared their God, had abandoned them. That is where the chariot came, not to the temple in its glory, not to a mountaintop of triumph, to the riverbank of the displaced, to the lowest point of a broken people, to the very place where God seemed most absent. The heavens opened over the exile, and the throne came riding on the storm, and the message of its coming was the message the exile most needed and least expected to hear. You are not abandoned. I have not been left behind in the ruins. I am here, with you, in the place of your captivity, and my presence has wheels, and there is nowhere you can be carried that I cannot come. Perhaps you know something of exile yourself. Perhaps you are sitting tonight in a season of life that feels like a foreign country, far from a place or a person or a self that you have lost. Perhaps there has been a temple in your own life that fell, a center that crumbled, a thing you built your meaning upon that is now rubble in another country, the work that defined you, gone, the health you relied upon, broken, the person whose presence was your home, departed, the faith that once came easily, now strained and distant. And perhaps you have wondered, as the exiles by the river wondered, whether God is still there at all, or whether he stayed behind in the better days, in the place you can no longer reach. Hear the message of the chariot. The throne is not chained to your better days. The presence is not confined to the place you have lost. The glory that rides on the living wheels, the throne that moves in every direction, the eyes that see down every road, can come to you in the foreign country, on the bank of whatever river you weep beside tonight. That is the whole point of the wheels. That is why God showed the exile a moving throne rather than a fixed one. Not to dazzle him with strangeness, but to tell him, in the only language vast enough to carry it, that there is no exile beyond the reach of the chariot, no captivity his presence cannot enter, no riverbank so far from home that the heavens cannot open above it. His throne has wheels, and it can roll to where you are, and the many eyes upon those wheels, which might have frightened you when first you heard of them, are in truth your deepest comfort. For the throne that comes to you comes seeing. It does not arrive blind to your situation, unaware of your grief, ignorant of the particular shape of your exile. The wheels are full of eyes round about, which means that wherever the chariot of his presence rolls, it rolls already knowing, already seeing, already aware of every tear and every fear and every hidden ache that you have told no one. You are not a stranger to the throne that comes for you. You are seen. You have always been seen. And the presence that sees you in every direction is the presence that is moving, even now, toward the place where you are. Step back now and consider how many different kinds of people have stood before this one vision and what it has meant to each. The mystic stood before the chariot and saw a ladder, a way of ascent, a path through the palaces and the gates toward an experience of the throne, And he prepared his soul for the journey with fasting and purity, and the learning of secret names. The philosopher stood before the same chariot and saw a code, a veil over the deepest truths of metaphysics, the structure of reality wrapped in vision, so that only the wise could unfold it, and he reasoned his way toward the formless God, beyond all image. The artist stood before it and saw the four faces and carved them into stone, the winged man and lion and ox and eagle, and gave the church its enduring image of the fourfold gospel. The enslaved and the suffering stood before it and saw a song of deliverance, a wheel within a wheel turning by faith and grace, a God whose throne could roll into the deepest bondage. And the grieving exile, then and now, stood before it and saw the one thing he most needed, a presence that had not abandoned him, a glory with wheels. What is striking is not how different these readings are, but how each of them, in its own way, has hold of something true. The chariot really is a way toward God. As the mystics knew, it really does open onto the deepest truths about the divine nature, as the philosophers knew. It really does gather all of creation, every face and every order, around the one Lord, as the artists knew. It really is a song of deliverance for the captive, as the enslaved knew. And it really is the assurance that no exile is beyond the reach of God's presence, as the grieving have always known. The vision is large enough to hold all of these at once, because the reality it reveals, the living God enthroned in glory, free, all-seeing, surrounded by the worship of all creation, is large enough to be all of these things, to all of these people. A single throne, seen from 1,000 riverbanks. And beneath every one of these readings lies the deepest thing of all, the thing the vision exists to produce, worship. For whatever else the chariot is, it is first and last a scene of worship. The creatures worship. The wheels turn in praise, the burning ones cry, "Holy, holy, holy." The elders cast their crowns. The whole of heaven, in every version of the vision, is bent in a single direction, pouring out adoration before the throne without ceasing, day and night, before the beginning and beyond the end. The chariot is a moving sanctuary, and worship is the air it moves through. And the final invitation of the vision, the thing it has always been quietly drawing every reader toward, is not merely to understand it, or to ascend by it, or to decode it, or even only to be comforted by it, but to join it, to add your small and earthly voice to the great song that the creatures and the wheels and the burning ones have been singing since before the world was made. To fall on your face, as the priest did, not in terror alone, but in adoration. To say, with the gathered worshippers of every age, "Blessed be the glory of the Lord from his place." For when you do that, something quiet and remarkable happens. The same spirit that moves the wheels of the chariot, the spirit of the living creatures that is in the wheels, the one will that animates the whole and turns it all toward the throne, begins to order your own divided soul, to turn your own four faces in a single direction, to make of your own life a small moving sanctuary that bears his presence wherever you are sent. You do not have to storm the heavens to find the throne. You do not have to learn the secret names or pass the burning guardians at the gates. You have only to turn, where you are, on the bank of whatever river you find yourself beside, and lift your face, all of it, toward the glory, and join the song. And the chariot that came to the exile by the Merkabah will have come, in its own way, to you. There is one more dimension of the vision to dwell upon before we close, and it is the one that lifts the whole of it above the reach of time. We spoke earlier of the ancient teaching that the throne of glory was among the things established before the foundation of the world, conceived in the mind of God before the first day, the eternal seat of the eternal King. Let that settle on you fully, because it changes how you see everything else in the vision. The throne that Ezekiel saw riding into Babylon was not new. It did not begin when the chariot appeared over the river. It was already ancient beyond all reckoning, older than the stars, older than the earth, the primordial seat from which God reigned before there was anything to reign over. and it is not going to end. When the last river runs dry, and the last city falls, and the last empire is forgotten, when the heavens themselves are rolled up like a scroll, the throne of glory will still be there. For it was before the beginning, and it abides beyond the end. This is the steadiness beneath everything that moves in the vision. For all its restless motion, all its fire and lightning and wheels that never stop turning, the chariot carries something utterly unshakable at its center. The creatures move, the wheels turn, the storm rolls in, and the glory comes and goes. But the throne is the throne, the one enthroned is the one enthroned, and his reign does not rise and fall with the kingdoms of the earth. Nebuchadnezzar's empire would crumble. Babylon would fall to the Persians, and Persia to the Greeks, and the Greeks to Rome, and Rome to the long centuries that followed, kingdom giving way to kingdom, throne toppling throne, all of it rising and falling like waves. And above all of it, untouched, unmoved, unshaken, the throne of glory rode on, the one seat that no army could storm, and no empire could topple, and no exile could remove from its place. There is comfort in that, for those who have lived long enough to watch things pass. And many who listen to these words have lived exactly long enough. You have watched the certainties of your youth give way. You have seen institutions you trusted falter, leaders you admired fall, the strong become weak, and the permanent prove temporary. You have felt the ground shift beneath your own life, the slow erosion of the years, the awareness, deeper now than it once was, that everything here is passing, that you yourself are passing, that the river of time carries everything away in the end. And into that awareness, the vision speaks its oldest and steadiest word. There is a throne that does not pass. There is a king who does not fall. There is a glory that was before all your beginnings and will abide beyond all your endings, a seat of sovereignty as ancient as the mind of God and as enduring as his own eternity. Everything you have watched slip away was always meant to slip away. But the throne at the center of the chariot was never going anywhere. It is the one fixed point in a world of waves, the one thing that the river of time cannot carry off. And so the motion and the stillness of the vision belong together, and together they speak a single word of hope. The throne moves so that it can come to you in your exile, wherever you are carried. And the throne does not pass, so that when you have come to it, you have come to the one thing that will never be taken away. The wheels are for finding you. The throne is for keeping you. The chariot rolls through every captivity to reach the captive, and at its center is the seat that outlasts every empire and every age, the glory that was before the world and will reign when the world is made new. For Christian readers, the journey of the glory in Ezekiel has always pointed toward a still greater homecoming. They have seen in the departing and returning presence a foreshadowing of a deeper movement of God toward his people, a presence that would not merely visit the exiles, but would come to dwell among them in the most intimate way imaginable. Where Ezekiel saw the glory withdraw from a temple of stone and then return to it, Christian readers heard the promise of a God who would make his dwelling among people directly, the word who, in the language of John's Gospel, became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory. The same word, glory, the kavod of the chariot, the radiance that filled the temple and rode upon the wheels, is the word John reaches for to describe the presence that had now come to dwell, not in a building, but in the midst of human life itself. And the great vision of the throne in John's revelation, the four living creatures, and the sea of glass, and the rainbow, and the threefold holy, does not end in that throne room. It moves toward a final scene, the last vision of the Christian scriptures, in which a loud voice from the throne declares the thing that the whole long story has been straining toward. Behold, it says, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them. And he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more, neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away. And in that final city, the seer notices something astonishing. He saw no temple in it, for the Lord God and the Lamb are its temple. No temple. No Holy of Holies set apart, no inner room where the presence is hidden, no veil to be passed, no ark to be approached only once a year, because the presence that once dwelt behind the veil now fills everything, and God himself is the temple, and the dwelling of God is with his people forever. Do you see the ark from the river to the city? It begins with an exiled priest who has lost his temple, watching the glory come to him in a foreign land on a moving throne. It passes through the departure of that glory from a doomed Jerusalem and its promised return to a restored one. And it ends, in the Christian hope, with a presence that needs no temple at all, a God who dwells with his people directly and forever, where exile is over and tears are wiped away and the former things have passed. The wheels that came to find the captive have done their final work. The throne that moved through every exile has come to rest in the midst of a people who will never be exiled again. And the glory that the priest could only glimpse, falling on his face by the river, fills everything and is everywhere, and is at home at last among those it came so far to find. That is the trajectory the chariot was always tracing, from the very first turn of its wheels over the waters of the Merkabah. A presence in motion toward its people, a glory that goes into exile to bring the exiles home. A throne that moves through every captivity until there are no more captivities, and that comes to rest, at the last, in a world where God dwells with us, and we with him, and the long ache of every exile is finally, gently, eternally healed. Before we close, it is worth tracing one more thread, because the throne-bearers Ezekiel saw were not strangers to the pages of Scripture. They had appeared before, again and again, all the way back to the very beginning, and following them through the whole sweep of the Bible reveals a pattern as old as Eden itself. The first time we meet them is at the gate of paradise. When the man and the woman were sent out of the Garden of Eden, the book of Genesis tells us, God placed at the east of the garden the cherubim and a flaming sword that turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. There they stand, at the very dawn of the human story, the cherubim and the turning flame, guardians of the holy, keepers of the threshold between fallen humanity and the presence of God. And notice the flame that turns every way, an early cousin, perhaps, of the fire that moved among the living creatures and the wheels that turned in every direction without swerving. From the first pages of Scripture, the cherubim are the beings who stand at the boundary of the sacred, guarding what is holy from what is not yet ready to approach it. We meet them next in the wilderness, at Sinai, when God gives Moses the design for the Ark of the Covenant. Upon the cover of the ark, the mercy seat, 2 cherubim of hammered gold were to be made, one at each end, their wings spread upward, overshadowing the cover, their faces turned toward one another and toward the mercy seat between them. And there God says, between the 2 cherubim that are over the ark, I will meet with you and speak with you. The cherubim mark the place of meeting, the throne of the invisible king. Throughout the Hebrew Scriptures, God is described again and again as the one who is enthroned upon the cherubim, the one who sits between the cherubim, as though the golden figures over the ark formed the seat, the very throne, of the divine presence in the midst of Israel. The same beings who guarded the gate of Eden now guard and bear the throne of God in the heart of his people. And when Solomon built the temple, he filled it with cherubim. He placed 2 great cherubim of olive wood overlaid with gold in the innermost sanctuary, the Holy of Holies. Their wings stretched out so that they spanned the whole width of the room, wing touching wing in the center and wing touching wall on either side, overshadowing the ark beneath them. He carved cherubim into the walls, into the doors, into the very fabric of the house. The temple was, in a sense, a house of cherubim, the whole sanctuary built around the throne-bearers and the presence they upheld. And it was this, the cherubim over the ark in the innermost room, that the first book of Chronicles called the Chariot, the golden chariot of the cherubim that spread their wings and covered the ark of the covenant of the Lord. Now follow the thread to its astonishing conclusion. The cherubim guard the gate of Eden. The cherubim overshadow the ark in the wilderness. The cherubim fill the temple of Solomon and form the throne of the invisible king. And then, by the river in Babylon, the cherubim come alive. The golden, motionless figures of the Holy of Holies rise up, take wing, and fly. The chariot that had stood still in the innermost room for centuries lifts off the ground and comes sweeping in on the north wind to find an exiled priest, and Ezekiel, looking at the four-faced living creatures and their wheels, is looking at the cherubim of the temple set free and set in motion. The static throne has become a moving one. The guardians of the gate have become the bearers of a glory that goes out to seek its scattered people. The whole long history of the cherubim, from Eden to the ark to the temple, culminates in the moment the throne grew wheels and the presence went into exile to bring the exiles home. There is a beautiful symmetry in it. The cherubim who once barred the way to the tree of life, who stood with the flaming sword to keep fallen humanity out of the garden, are the same beings who now carry the presence of God toward fallen humanity into the very place of its exile and loss. The guardians of the threshold become the bearers of the homecoming. The flame that turned every way to keep us out becomes the chariot that moves every way to come and find us. From Eden's gate to Babylon's river, the cherubim trace the whole story of God and his people, the going out and the coming home, the presence guarded and the presence given, until the day when the dwelling of God is with man, and there is no gate left to guard, because there is no one left outside. And so we return, at the last, to where we began, to Babylon, to the slow brown waters of the Chebar Canal, moving through the flat Mesopotamian plain, to a community of exiles on its banks, far from home, far from the temple, wrestling in the dark with the fear that their God had been defeated and left behind, and to a young priest among them, a man who had lost the one thing that gave his life its meaning, looking up as the northern sky tore open. We have traveled a long way from that riverbank. We have followed the four living creatures through the centuries, the man and the lion and the ox and the eagle, the kings of all creation gathered beneath the throne. We have watched the wheels turn, the wheels within wheels, their rims full of watching eyes, moving in every direction without ever needing to turn. We have stood beneath the crystal firmament and lifted our eyes to the sapphire throne and the figure wrapped in fire and rainbow, the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. We have heard how the sages forbade the teaching of this vision, how they nearly hid the book away, how they told the story of the four who entered the garden, one dead, one mad, one lost, and only one returning in peace. We have descended with the mystics through the palaces and the gates, and reasoned with the philosophers toward the formless God, and watched the four faces become the four gospels, and heard the wheels turn through the spirituals of the enslaved, and found the ancient word for the throne's brightness living on in the lights we switch on at night. And through all of it, we have seen one thing held steady at the center, the throne that was before the world and abides beyond the end, the glory that goes into every exile to bring the exiles home. What did the priest see? In the end, by the river, he saw that he was not abandoned. He saw that the presence of God is free, bound to no place, confined to no temple, defeated by no empire, stopped by no exile. He saw a throne with wheels and watching eyes, and a glory that had crossed the desert to find him in the lowest place of his life and tell him, in the only language vast enough to carry it, that there is nowhere his people can be carried where he cannot come. And then, when the roar of the wings had subsided into stillness, he heard a voice, and the voice gave him a calling, and lifted him to his feet, and sent him out. The vision became a vocation. The seeing became a sending. And the exile who had lost everything became a prophet through whom the word of God would come to a grieving people. the prophet who would see the glory depart from the dying city and promise its return, and who would close his long book with a vision of a presence that dwells among its people and a place where the throne would rest forever. This is the gift the Chariot offers across the long centuries, to the exile by the river, and to you, wherever you are tonight. It offers the knowledge that you are seen, that the eyes upon the wheels have never lost sight of you, that the throne which moves through every captivity already knows the exact shape of yours. It offers the knowledge that you are not abandoned, that no loss you have suffered, and no foreign country of the soul you find yourself in tonight lies beyond the reach of a presence that has wheels. And it offers, beneath all the fire and the strangeness and the mystery that the unprepared could not safely bear, a single steady invitation to turn your face, all of it, your courage and your patience and your vision and your reverence, toward the glory, to stop grasping and start adoring, to join with your own small and earthly voice the song that the creatures and the wheels and the burning ones have been singing since before the foundation of the world. Blessed be the glory of the Lord from his place. So let the vision do its quiet work in you now. Let the noise of the day fall away as the roar of the wings fell away into stillness. Let your striving rest. You do not need to storm the heavens or learn the secret names or prove yourself worthy at the burning gates. The chariot has always come to the lowly, to the exiled, to the ones who could only fall on their faces and worship. It came to a broken priest on a foreign riverbank, and it has not stopped moving since. May the throne that does not pass be your peace in a world of passing things. May the eyes upon the wheels remind you, in your darkest hours, that you are never unseen and never alone. May the presence that goes into every exile find you wherever you are and carry you, at the last, all the way home. And may the glory of the Lord, which filled the temple and rode upon the storm and dwelt among his people and will reign when all things are made new, be blessed, now and always, from its place. Rest now. The chariot is still moving, and its many eyes are watching over you.